Well, welcome all. I'm Julie Hediger. I'm the health educator here at the Riley County Health Department. So we're really grateful today to have Kalia with us, and she's going to be kind of leading a discussion and training around community engagement. But before we get started with that, we're going to give just a quick overview of the coalition. There's a couple new faces in the room, and then an update on where we're at, and then we're going to move into that community engagement visioning. So the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition, our mission is to create a healthier community through policy systems, environment, and individual decisions. So we view health very holistically and consider things like transportation and housing. We know that those social determinants of health affect people's health. And we really are striving to create a culture of health in our community. A little bit about our history. In 2011, the coalition was formed for the sole purpose of addressing access to healthy food. So there was a lot of work done with healthy vending and concessions. In 2014, we started to look into tobacco policies and active transportation. And then really in the last year, we've restructured to form several different work groups. So things are constantly changing in the coalition. New members are being added. Work is getting done. So things are happening. In spring 2014, we also formed this Food and Farm Task Force, which is really starting there to help start a Food and Farm Council, which will hopefully be getting started at the first of the year. So our organization chart, this really does change like daily, but we have an administrative support team, which is mostly the health department and then county extension. Jenny used to be here. She has a replacement now. Who will be starting with us, Megan. So we're really here to provide support for the coalition, to provide resources. Then we have our leadership team, which is made up of the administrative support team and then the chairs and co-chairs of each work group. So most work groups have a chair and a co-chair. We're still looking to kind of fill some leadership roles there as well. So we have the nutrition work group, and then that Food and Farm Council kind of falls under that. We have an active transportation work group, access and coordination of services, mental health, and then health equity. So how did we kind of get here? How did we get to these different work groups? So in 2014, we did a community health needs assessment, and then from that, we created a community health improvement plan, which is really picking some priorities to work on and creating action steps. Who's responsible for doing that to kind of communicate back to the public? You know, we heard what the needs are, and here's what we're doing. So we can be transparent with them, but it also kind of helps us stay on task as well. So the 13 priorities that came out of that community needs assessment, anywhere from binge drinking to childcare, but we asked the community to pick 3 that they really thought we could make a lot of movement on in a couple years. So those 3 priorities were the communication, coordination of systems and services, which is now what we call the access and coordination of services group, transportation, and then mental health. Any questions? I know that was a lot of information very quickly, but I think several of you have heard this a couple times. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Brandon. He's going to give us a couple of coalition updates.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
So a couple of things. You may be aware that the coalition was just awarded the Leadership Transformation Grant from the Kansas Leadership Center. And this was an effort that many of you in the room were part of a few months ago. And we applied as a coalition, and some of you submitted some letters of support for this grant. But in short, what this grant is $25,000 worth of leadership training for the members of our coalition. And we have, that equates to 40 slots of leadership training at the Kansas Leadership Center. If you're not familiar with the Kansas Leadership Center, they're doing some really amazing things and things that are highly relevant for the work that we're doing in the coalition. In fact, you know, one of the sort of guiding ideas behind their leadership training is that they're helping people and organizations develop the capacity to work together to address tough, complex problems, right? And when we're talking about the kind of work that we're doing in the coalition, whether it be food systems, food insecurity, childcare, even physical activity, transportation, like these are not easy problems. Like we just can't hire a consultant to come in and say, oh, here's exactly what you need to do, done, right? It goes beyond that. These are adaptive problems, and so our coalition over the next year between January 1 of 2018 and December 31. How many days in December? We're going to be sending folks from the coalition to the Kansas Leadership Center to receive this training, and I'll tell you more about that later. There's a few different kinds of training that we can do there, but it's something that we're really excited about, and also something that we're sort of in the process now of thinking about. How can we develop the capacity of our coalition, right? So we're at this phase where so far the coalition is kind of like this convening space, right, where people can come together and work on projects related to the work in the work groups. And we're asking ourselves, well, what else can we do, right? Like how can we help you actually do that work? And the leadership training is a huge part of that. So the other thing, last update here is in our Access and Coordination of Services work group. We have a consultant coming in on December 6th at 8:30 a.m. In this room to talk to us about a initiative called the Community Care Team. And let me back up a second here. The purpose of this work group, the Access and Coordination of Services work group, is to try to figure out, what can we be doing better as a community to increase access to services and also coordinate services. And you may be aware, or maybe not aware, that there are some clients and patients in the community who are utilizing services, whether it's the ER or emergency services, other kinds of emergency services, at very high rates, but they're not benefiting from those services. In other words, they keep showing up. It's this revolving door kind of phenomenon, right? And you can interpret that problem in a lot of different ways, but one really good way I would suggest to you is that there's a coordination of services problem. That people are not getting the services that they need at the time that they need them. And so community care teams is a strategy to try to address that. And there's an organizing group that has organized this event. Robin is part of that team, Caitlin is part of that team, and maybe a few others in this room. But that's going to be a 2-hour workshop on that day where we're going to explore pilot testing this community care team's model in Riley County. So you're more than welcome to attend. We've only sent out invites so far to agencies and people who would likely participate or be on this community care team, usually people who are providing some kind of direct services. But in line with the sort of social determinants sort of approach to thinking about health, it's not just, people providing, healthcare. It's also the housing agencies. It's also, the WIC coordinator. It's also, child care coordinators, right? And so it's a really holistic approach to providing care. So those are the only updates that I have. Does anybody have any questions on those before we move on? Okay, so before we jump into our workshop here, before I hand it over to Kalia, I want to give you a little bit of context for where this workshop is coming from, and sort of share with you some of the inspiration that we pulled from for creating this in the first place. And to do that, I'm actually going to read you a little vignette that challenges us to think about how we go about doing the work that we're doing, right? How we go about trying to improve community health. And so I'm just going to also at the same time run through some images here that depict how some other communities across the country, but even some here in Kansas, and in particular Allen County, is going about doing their work in their coalition. And if you're not familiar with Thrive Allen County is essentially a coalition that is now turned nonprofit in Allen County that just won the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health Prize. If you're not familiar with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, they are essentially the premier public health foundation in the country, and they don't give out these prizes willy-nilly. I couldn't think of a better term. So, willy-nilly. That's what we're going. So I'd like to read you a little vignette. This is not from Allen County, but it's very similar to what they're doing there. And Julie, if you wouldn't mind, I think we have like 4 or 5 images here in the next about 5 to 7 minutes or so. If you wouldn't mind just kind of flipping through those. Okay, so I'm going to read to you something. A vignette about the Healthy Neighborhoods Project. West Contra Costa County is composed primarily of people of color and includes many deep pockets of poverty. In 1994, the Healthy Neighborhoods Project began as a pilot project in Pittsburgh, California. It was soon replicated in 5 additional neighborhoods. In each of them, the health department had been frustrated by attempts to engage communities in public health projects. The department's attempts to mobilize the community around tobacco control in the early 90s in the wake of several tobacco control policy victories and an influx of cigarette tax dollars was emblematic of the frustrations experienced. A long history of failed efforts and mistrust between the department, the nearby University of California, Berkeley, which often used this community for its own research purposes, and community-based organizations made dialogue with grassroots local leaders difficult at best, particularly since the Tobacco Control Initiative did not address a real community-identified need. To illustrate this, imagine a community fraught with economic stress and gang violence. Enter the professional health educator, making a good salary with benefits, and her anti-smoking program. She understands, this is not about you. She understands that community involvement is critical to public health and seeks the buy-in from key leaders. What she may not understand, whether she's new to the department or not, is the following. It is likely that the community leaders she's approaching are already tapped for other categorical programs the health department has rolled out into the community. Furthermore, the local university has probably sought to involve them in community surveys and other research efforts. Also, every community needs assessment, every research study, and nearly every intervention is focused on community deficits, and thereby directly or indirectly reinforce the view that these neighborhoods are cesspools of problems, undermining community self-esteem. Also, in many communities, an influx of resources for one health program or another seldom has resulted in outcomes that residents could tangibly see or feel. Instead, many residents have concluded that the primary benefit of such programs are salaries for outside professionals and publications for faculty. Also, there may be a select group of community-based organizations, CBOs, that have well-established relationships with the health departments and are eager to accept contracts and other resources to partner on a health program. However, these CBOs don't always have a good track record of engaging residents on the grassroots level, may represent particular interest groups rather than the larger community, or both. After several years of good intentions being met with anger, mistrust, or at best passive indulgence, the Contra Costa Health Department staff did 2 things. First, and despite having their time paid for by categorical dollars for tobacco control, they spent long hours in the community with the blessing of the public health director, supporting local efforts to address 2 areas that were of great concern to residents: substance abuse and gang violence. Second, they decided to broaden outreach beyond the traditional CBOs and ask residents in the community who are respected by their neighbors how to proceed. And this is how the conversation never mind. In collaboration with community leaders and leadership in the health department, one of the authors of this vignette, who was then a program manager with the health department, launched the Healthy Neighborhoods Project, using the asset-based community development approach to help residents identify and build on their assets by stimulating community involvement and developing and implementing a resident-driven action plan to address local issues and concerns. At the heart of the Healthy Neighborhoods Project were the hiring and training of a project coordinator, 6 resident community organizers, and 120 neighborhood health advocates who made up neighborhood action teams in each participating neighborhood. Local teams were recruited by the project coordinator and organizers. The criteria for participation included living in the neighborhood, reflecting the diversity of the community, having a sincere interest in improving the neighborhood, and being willing to commit oneself to participating for 1 year. All team members participated in 2 to 3 days of initial training in areas that included community organizing, asset mapping, participatory evaluation, and team building. An initial training activity which introduced them to the model of capacity building also inventoried their own strengths and skills, which later were mobilized in their neighborhoods. The community organizers and neighborhood health advocates also participated in bi-weekly in-service sessions throughout the year on topics such as recruitment, meeting facilitation, public speaking, and media advocacy, or the strategic use of media to frame issues from a community or health perspective. Hands-on technical assistance also was provided by the project coordinator, who worked closely with each neighborhood team on a weekly basis and assisted individual organizers and advocates with personal and professional skill development. So there's a bit more in here, but I think what I've read so far kind of illustrates the general approach. And I want to just finish by sharing with you some of the accomplishments that came out of this process. So these accomplishments have included advocating for and bringing about changes on multiple levels and in many diverse areas, including installation of speed bumps, removal of a tobacco billboard targeting youth, successful competition for a $100,000 grant for jobs skills training, creation of a mural capturing residents' vision of what a healthy community should look like and painted by 40 youth under the direction of a local artist, successful advocating for additional evening and weekend bus service, increased police patrols, improved street lighting and trash pickup, successful obtaining of funding for youth sports programs, and establishment of computer classes. So the goal of today is to learn, just sort of enter into this conversation about, well, what is it exactly that we're talking about here as we listen to this vignette? And this is a form of community engagement. And I'm aware, at least in my training, like that's not something that's part of my training, or has been part of my training. And it's something that, as we've stumbled upon in some of our work, especially in the Health Equity Project and other areas, it's something that we felt like we might want to learn more about, and also that other people in the coalition might want to learn more about. So here to help us think about this and learn more about it is Kalia. And Kalia began her career in sales and marketing, but over time came to the realization that her true passion was in the development of people and healthy communities. Her strengths are in leadership development and community capacity building, community engaged research, and strategic planning. She has a strong interest in health equity and the amelioration of poverty conditions achieved through civic engagement and community mobilization and empowerment strategies. Her current work focuses on researching local food systems and building community capacity to address food insecurity and increase healthy food access. She's a graduate research assistant and consultant at the Center for Engagement and Community Development at K-State. She's a member of the Health Equity Task Force in our coalition. She's part of the Rural Grocery Initiative at K-State. She's currently pursuing 2 masters.
Done with 2 masters.
Okay, she's done with 2 masters, one in architecture and one in community development. And she's also consulting on some work that we're doing in the Healthy Communities Laboratory. So please welcome Kalia.
Yikes, I have nothing else to say about myself. Thanks, Brandon. So guys, I'm gonna kind of fly through this, but like Brandon mentioned, this is just an introduction, something to get your feet wet in some of these concepts that we're talking about that were portrayed in the vignette that Brandon shared. I want to leave time for discussion at the end. So my apologies if we're going fast, but the point is to have something to chew on and think about. So no need for introductions. Engagement. So this is something that we wrestle with at the Center for Engagement and Community Development, defining what engagement is, because part of our work is to try to foster engagement on campus between departments, but also foster community-university relationships. So I'm curious to know from you guys out here, how do you define engagement, whether that is personally or even by your organization's terms? What is it? Feel free to just speak it out there.
Approaching whatever the subject matter is and acting.
Okay.
I'd say being invested in something. You're willing to put your time into something.
Connecting with others.
Okay. Approaching a problem, a topic, being invested, involving community groups. Anything else to add?
Listening, and then acting upon what you heard in a way that the community wants you to.
Okay. Active listening connected to action.
Two-way.
Of course.
Two-way dialogue and communication.
Okay. Final thoughts. That was a lot, by the way. Okay. So here's how we look at it. As I mentioned before, I'm with the Center for Engagement and Community Development, also the Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy, and we have 5 things that we look at when we're defining engagement at CECD. So we have shared partnerships between stakeholders, collaborative work that addresses some community need, goal, and or dream, work that is mutually beneficial to all parties in the relationship, and the creation and sharing of new knowledge, which we just heard a lot of these things from you guys here in the room a second ago. So looking at it from the ICDD side, we think about civic engagement, taking it just a little bit further by identifying increasing modes of participation and contribution to civic and public life through both political and non-political processes, and influencing relationships among leaders and followers who intend real changes that reflect their mutual purposes. I'll try to break that down and make that happen in action. But that is what we're going for. And several of you, again, mentioned some of these things when we were talking about engagement. And this is the part I really want to focus on. That's what we always want to get to, right? Real changes. How do we know that what we're doing is actually making a difference to the individuals that, well, here's the question. Are we doing it to them? Are we doing it for them? Or are we doing it with them? Because here's the thing. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So if we have kept doing something over and over and over again and we are not getting results, then it's time to do something different, to think about the problem in a different way. And that is because, whatever the question, the answer lies in the community. That is from Margaret Wheatley, but I heard it by way of Dr. Timothy Schaefer. So little thank you to Dr. Timothy Schaefer. So let's talk about some approaches in the public, or that we can use with the public to create some kind of public impact. And we look at it in terms of whatever our public participation goal is, our promise to the public, and example tools. So this is kind of a guide for where we're at on the community engagement spectrum, okay? So first thing we have inform. This is providing the public with balanced and objective information to assist them in understanding the problems, alternatives, and or solutions. So basically we're saying, we're doing stuff, we'll keep you informed. And this may look like fact sheets, websites, open houses. Then we have consulting, which is obtaining public feedback on analysis, alternatives, and or decisions. So this is a step further. We'll keep you informed, but we're also going to listen to and acknowledge concerns and provide feedback on how public input influence the decision. So that may be public comment, focus groups, surveys, public meetings. Next step is involving, that is working directly with the public throughout the process to ensure that public issues and concerns are consistently understood and considered. So we're going to work with you to ensure that your concerns and issues are directly reflected in the alternatives developed and provide feedback on how public input influenced the decision. So that's workshops, deliberative polling. Going beyond that, collaboration is partnering with the public in every aspect of the decision, including the development of alternatives and the identification of the preferred solution. So we're going to look to you, the public, for direct advice in formulating solutions and incorporate your advice and recommendations into the decisions to the maximum extent possible. So this looks like citizen advisory committees, grassroots work, consensus building, and participatory decision-making. And our final level of engagement is empowerment, which is where we place final decision-making in the hands of the public, where we say, we will implement what you've decided. And that may look like citizen juries, ballots, and delegated decisions. And all of this is provided by IAP2, this framework or spectrum. So think about, in the work that you're doing, where are you on this continuum? Where do you want to be? Where are you trying to ultimately go, and make sure your work is building upon that at every single point? Very, well, really it's being very thoughtful about your work and being very strategic. So let's talk a little bit about engagement practice and where we are at in issues and where we're at in streams of practice. So when is Thanksgiving? About 2 weeks from now? Okay, 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now. Believe me, I'm thinking about food all the time, but this will totally make sense. So let's look at it this way. So what I just talked about with your engagement stream, that is like, that's like setting your table. Figuring out how many places you're gonna have at the table and what you're setting out for the type of conversation you wanna have. So then if we talk about issue stage of development, this is your meal. This is meat and potatoes of what you're gonna have at this table. So we need to figure out what kind of issues that we're dealing with, and if we wanna do a proactive assessment, which is identifying potential or future issues, which could be done through future scans, trend identification, long-range planning, or if we're doing a responsive assessment, which has to do with a current or rapidly emerging problem, and we need to have some quantification of the breadth and depth of these issues. So proactive is really good for large-scale divisive issues, and responsive assessment is good for figuring out what the root causes of a problem are versus just the symptoms. Okay, so streams of practice, we have 4 different ways to look at our conversation or dialogic approach. We have exploration, where people learn more about themselves and their community or an issue, maybe come up with some innovative ideas. Have conflict transformation. So if we have some poor relations or specific conflicts among individuals or groups, we try to tackle that. We also have decision making. And this gets into policy impact and public knowledge. Last, we have collaborative action. People trying to tackle complex problems and take responsibility for solutions they come up with. And we may have a combination of these things when we are holding a public dialogue to figure out what's going on with the problem. So in terms of our Thanksgiving dinner table, this is the part where you figure out who you're gonna sit next to whom. Like Uncle Bob can't be next to Cousin Glenda because of that thing that happened 20 years ago or whatever. You think about what kind of interactions you want to take place between people. So I'm gonna pass this around you guys. We don't have time to go over it, but I want you to know that there are many approaches to dialogue for what you want your outcomes to be and what kind of conversation you want to hold. So here are examples of tools and strategies. And for some of you in the room, this may look familiar, but just when you have some time, absorb this. These are different ways to get the public involved. Furthermore, whenever we're trying to work on a project together, we have different roles that we can play. And sometimes it may be kind of difficult to imagine what role I'm going to play. So here's some ideas about roles that you can play in public engagement. And actually, what we're going to talk about next, I want you to keep some of these things in mind. Kind of browse over the goals, engagement framework, maybe save that for later, but I mean, you can go ahead and look through that too. But before we move on to the next section, just a quick summary. The things that we want to think about: what is our public impact? Where are we on the spectrum of public engagement? Where are we in our issue stage of development? How do we want to approach this issue for what kind of issue it is? And then streams of engagement: what kind of conversation or interaction do we want to have around these issues? Then, with the paperwork I handed out to you, you can choose a dialogic process, and then you can also figure out, well, what role am I going to play in bringing all of this together? So I'm really glad that you shared that vignette, Brendan, because we are going to do, well, I didn't mean to do that, but we're gonna do this. Oh, magic, it just came back together. How'd that happen? Thanks, Brandon. Okay, so we're gonna have a discussion activity. We're gonna take an appreciative inquiry approach to kind of bring together all of these concepts we just heard about, although very briefly, and explore some things that we can do here in Flint Hills Wellness Coalition. So appreciative inquiry is an ABCD approach, an assets-based community development approach. So it has 4 different steps. So first 2 steps, discover and dream, we're going to identify successes, accomplishments, and then envision how to build on successes by identifying what made those actions, those programs, those campaigns successful. Now, usually your next 2 steps would be design and destiny, which is developing strategies to accomplish goals that you explored in your dream stage, and then destiny is just continuously learning and adjusting to carry out those goals. We're not there yet, but in the vignette that was shared, this is essentially what they were going about doing. Instead, today we're going to look at engagement, so ideas and opportunities for public engagement and participation. And then we are going to touch on challenges. What kind of barriers might we have to effective public engagement? Okay, so I'm gonna turn that off. Perfect. Okay. So let's have some discussion. Water first. And here's the other thing. If you can't see what's up here, then feel free to come up here. You guys don't have to stay at your tables. If you want to come up here so you can see what's going on better, because I don't know how big I'm going to write yet, then go ahead. That is totally fine. But first, let's talk about successes. So share with me programs, campaigns, whatever in your professional work where you've had an experience of success. Just describe what that program, campaign, or initiative was.
To have to be like directly related to public engagement.
Not necessarily. We'll tease some elements out here in a little bit, but I hope there have been some successes in the room. Think about it.
I'll just offer that in the area of mental health, several years ago, there was the formation of a group called the Riley County Mental Health Task Force. And as a result of conversations and identification of problems, it was decided that law enforcement needed to have mental health professionals working with them to respond to the mentally ill individuals they encountered on the street when they were on patrol. And so the outcome was that 2 mental health professionals positions have been funded through the city and county law board. And it's a partnership now between Pawnee Mental Health and Riley County Police Department to these two mental health co-responders who work with the police department. And so that did not exist until about a year ago. Okay.
Okay.
Also kind of along the same line with the university health center, we saw that mental health is a huge issue with students. Actually, right now, the second most common reason students come to looking is because of anxiety. So we recognized that a few years back, and we were successful in recruiting 2 mental health nurse practitioners that are now on the staff.
By the way, can you guys see this pretty well? Okay. What else?
Well, one that's still in progress of happening is the development of the publicly appointed city county food and farm council, which will be an advisory group with the sole purpose of working on food system issues in our community. And at this point, there's a lot of people doing a little bit of dabbling. This will be their focus. Kind of cited that also, Julie didn't mention the on-campus food pantry. So that's an outcome related to helping food insecurity students.
Okay.
One of the coalition successes has been healthier vending options in the city and the county. And then also working with 5-Star Vending to offer those healthier options to other people as well.
In transportation, we're launching new day-to-day routes that have well, we thought there was a lot of
What was that last part?
it doesn't matter. Just
Okay. Never mind, it didn't happen.
We've also been successful with our Safe Routes to School programs and our transportation alternative programs here. Yes.
I think we've also increased citizen participation with the Final Friday rides.
I'd also have to add that I think through the coalition, we've made non-vehicular transportation to be seen as part of the transportation network.
Okay, say that one more time.
Non-vehicular,
Non-vehicular, okay.
you could add green apple bikes at the end of there as well.
All right, got it.
Anything else?
Well, this coalition is a great example of only 3 years ago it would have had a single focus and has now expanded itself into a collaborative effort of 5 work groups with the development of subgroups under that and increased grant support. So it's work in progress, but it's certainly progress.
Okay. We're gonna move on to the next one, but if you think of anything else, and we're finishing up, come up here and write it down so that we can capture as much as possible, but I want to be respectful of our time. We're gonna move on to the next thing. So let's talk about some of those conditions for success. Even looking at these projects, what made these things possible? Okay.
Collaboration among organizations.
Okay. And in some of these cases, how did the collaboration happen? How did it come about? If you could provide some details. Chance.
There has to be a leader or leaders driving the effort.
You have to be able to show a need for it and then get the buy-in.
Seems like anything specific about the issue, like with the employees and mental health, get really specific about the issue.
I think it's also the fact you have to understand you don't know all the answers, or you're not the sole provider of the solution, so you're willing to take a chance to discuss the issue with others.
In terms of transportation, it's people seeing things done elsewhere, thinking it can be done here, or should be done.
So let's talk a little bit more about inspiration, getting inspiration from elsewhere. How do we instill that? How do you make that happen?
What level are we talking about? Like, I just went on the regional visit, with some civic and business leaders, and you tell them about things here, and then all of a sudden they go see exactly what you're talking about, voila. You know, it's a great idea, let's do it. People have to see it sometimes, at least in transportation, before they click for them.
Okay. And really, we talk about this at any level. You know, whether it's just interpersonal here in a smaller space between two individuals, or much larger, like what we just shared here.
You have to create a vision too.
I think it fostering a culture of yes or why not, or however you want to put it. People just say, oh, I ain't gonna work in Manhattan, but why bother go get inspiration anywhere else?
Okay. Anything else to add on inspiration? And again, if something comes up to you later or it comes to mind, feel free to write it in.
Can I come back under, I think it's a new bullet point, but
Okay.
it seems like in all of these, there's a willingness to keep going forward even when there are setbacks. So I'm not familiar with all of them, the situations, but several of them, I know there's been somebody that said, why did it happen here? But there's a willingness to keep going.
Okay.
When somebody said no.
So overcoming barriers. What do we need? What has happened in some of these situations to overcome barriers?
Support.
What's that?
Support.
Support.
Great. I
perseverance.
Creativity.
Forming new relationships or partnerships.
Okay. So now we're getting some connections back to other points we brought up. Which this can also be a part of support.
And I think what Chad kind of spoke to earlier too, but also like recognizing that you may not have all the answers or you may not know the situation as a whole, and so being willing to reach out to other people and to build relationships. Again, back to the relationships too,
I think expanding awareness and knowledge, this is adaptive, helping people understand what that means versus that linear line approach. People are not comfortable with that or understand the adaptive work, so they bump into those barriers. I think that's important that people feel more comfortable with that.
And I think along with that too, like knowing that it's going to take time. It's not going to be a quick fix, or it's not going to happen overnight, but that you really have to be in it for the long haul too.
Okay, realistic about investment of time. Okay. Anything else to add from some of these situations or successes? Other things that you can think of that may not be on here that created the conditions for success. So we've got collaboration among organizations, we have inspiration, we have overcoming barriers. And there's some, crossover in some of these categories, but anything else to add?
Closing the deal, doing that follow-up and making sure that all the pieces fit properly and it's within the need.
Let's make that a new one. Close the deal. And I'm hearing maybe something like coordination, bring all the pieces together.
Is financial considered a condition?
It can be, yeah.
Or just resources in general.
There, resources, and we'll put financial under there. So let's talk about these two subjects, closing the deal and coordination and resources. So we've got financial.
Would you say the heart of the deal?
Yeah. That sounds poetic. And actually, let's talk a little bit about that. What does the art of the deal mean? What's involved in that?
I said that completely as a joke.
Well, I put chance up here. If you say it, I'm going to put it up here. But let's explore that. Close the deal, the art of the deal, coordination.
Well, I don't know what your take with that statement was, but so for example, with the mental health, the partnership between the police department and county mental health, I imagine that Robin had to do a lot of the messing of your, how you talked about it to people that were going to pay for it. So
strategic messaging.
Yeah.
That's just one of the things that I do.
Yeah.
Say something and
Yeah.
All right.
It also has to benefit both parties.
Mutually beneficial.
I think that goes back to having a clear statement of what the issue is that you're trying to address.
And I think a clear goal in mind. I mean, some of this stuff, we never know where we want to go, so we never can close a deal. But if we have an end game in mind, that's how it goes.
Okay, clarity. And even on resources, financial, we know that's always a huge one. It's always a big one. But there's more.
Time.
An equally big one.
you know, the mutually beneficial one is kind of interesting in that, you know, that kind of, I think that kind of refers to, you know, people who are sitting at the table who are interested in making progress on that issue. But I think it's also important to recognize that for some things, there is clearly opposition, you know, to whatever, you know, progress you're trying to make on that issue, and considering, you know, how to deal with that is also important.
Okay, addressing opposition.
I think it goes back to that strategic messaging also, knowing what your opposition is going to be and figuring out a way to address those issues.
And I think also part of that is too, is like kind of identifying the multiple interpretations too, and then being able to create messaging, I guess, to kind of help with each of those, or to make sure that you're thinking through what all of those different interpretations could be too.
I like to say that when you do adaptive work, you have to become a multilingualist, able to speak many different languages to many different people, because we really are all speaking different languages and a lot of times have the same point to make.
Sometimes overcoming inertia or indifference can be more difficult than addressing opposition. It's the whole idea that it's not my problem.
And I think having the right people at the table, I mean, is to success. I mean, sometimes you can't go anywhere if you don't have the right people at the table.
We call that a resource.
That's where I was going to.
Yeah. Let's fill up this resource space a little bit more.
Infrastructure.
What are some of the things you think about when you think of infrastructure? Anyone?
Depending on what it is, it can be, we think of transportation, it could be sidewalks, it could be bike lanes, it could be
Buses, drivers.
yeah, lighting even.
The workforce.
Yeah, workforce.
Okay. So we have some physical things. We have some like human labor related things.
I think about like a communication infrastructure as well. Like even this coalition is kind of infrastructure, right? Like there's there's space provided to bring people together to do this work. There's some level of support for members of the coalition to do this work. That's a kind of infrastructure.
It can be, and it really ties into this coordination piece too. Okay. Anything else to add for infrastructure or just resources in general?
I'd say right people can actually be broken out into meaning a lot of different things. Right people could mean people that have power, influence, financial, certain skill sets, communication abilities, relationships, lots of different kinds of right.
Assets.
Yeah.
Multiple assets. Multiple assets and positioning. And that gets into some of those questions of power, influence.
Voice, that type of thing.
Oh, what was that?
Voice, yeah.
Voice?
Voice.
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 Okay, I didn't know how voice. All right. And voice perspective? Is that along the same lines, or are we slightly different on that?
When I heard voice, I heard power.
Ah, okay. Yeah, and that relates to position. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. And we filled out more papers than I thought we were going to, which is great. Yeah, Brandon, that would be awesome. Please. All right, so next one, given everything that we talked about here, let's talk about. I don't want to be wasteful, but it's so funny. Ryle thinks it's funny because in the office I move around papers on walls and everything's lined up. Yeah, I'm a bad person. Worst nightmare. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about public engagement. Okay, looking to our successes. We talked a lot about collaboration, okay? We talked a lot about coordination, needing the right people at the table. So then, what are some things that we do to be successful about engaging the public in this?
Building interest by giving them a vision of the outcome.
Who's now?
The public, or the.
And you know what, it doesn't even just have to be the wider public. What about when you want to have partnerships with organizations? Where does the engagement happen there too? What are some of the conditions? You can think about it from that perspective as well. What else? We've got build interest by providing a vision of the outcome. What gets people to buy in, to want to be a part of something, to be interested at all?
Personal connection.
Make it appealing.
Okay, so let's talk about make it appealing. How do we do that? Or what has to be in there for that?
And you have to get emotional buy-in a lot of times, and so figuring out, from the emotional standpoint, what it is going to get them to want to be a part of it.
Okay.
And the word compelling comes to mind too.
I think it goes down to why does this matter to me?
Okay. So
I think I'd also add one additional element to that is that why does participation lead to a positive impact?
So part of this can be the what's in it for me, the what's in it for my community, which still comes down to what's in it for me to some extent.
And I think that's the hard part of this is that sometimes in the work that we do, I don't always know that what we're doing is going to have a positive impact. And I don't mean that negatively, I mean that when we're doing adaptive work and we're being experimental, I don't always know, or I wouldn't even say that we don't always know that what we're going to do will change the policy that we want it to, or to change some procedure, or change get you a street light that you wanted. I mean, and that's a little pessimistic, but I don't know that we always know that.
Okay. When we're being experimental, how do we know that we're being impactful when we're being experimental? Or just in general, but even especially so when we're going into uncharted territory. And we know measurement is usually pretty important for grants, for finances, for people that want to continue to do the work. What do I have to show for it? Let me come back real quick to this emotion, be compelling. Why does this matter? What's the basis for that? What is behind that? What gets people emotional? What makes them feel compelled?
there has to be some conflict or, I can't even think of the other word I want to use.
Like an unaddressed need of some
Yeah,
sort?
need, pain, pain's not the right word, but you know what I'm saying,
Mhm.
an issue.
Issue. Okay. So sometimes we have to help people figure out what that is. And that gets down to root cause as well, because sometimes we see symptoms of problems and we put a Band-Aid over a bullet hole, I say. And it doesn't stop the bleeding, it doesn't get at what the actual problem is. So if we come in and we do this little thing on the surface, you know, maybe it's good for a minute. And then also emotions being compelling and speaking to adaptive work, which we talked about in different spaces here. What about people's values, attitudes, beliefs? Those really ambiguous, hard to grasp, but are at the center and core of everything that you do to try to make change. But then you think about something like that and all these other things that we've mentioned and bring it back to building the interest through a vision of the outcome. When we think about values, attitudes, beliefs, conflict, need, issue, this all together. Anything else that we want to add onto public engagement? This one's a little bit more difficult to think about because we've been wrestling with this problem everywhere in every community for how long? How do we get people to care that don't care?
It really is underscoring in that personal, because it's not about, I mean, newspaper ads are part of it, social media is a part of it, you know, press releases, all that kind of traditional marketing stuff certainly is a part of it. But as much as anything, I think it's the talking to the person next to you or your neighbor or the person, you know, who shares clients with you or people with you. It's making those personal connections and one-on-one beginning to influence how other people view the problem. And doing the one-on-one invitations, you know, we come join me, you know, we're talking about this issue, it's really important to the community and to you. And I just think that it really is personal in using our influence at that personal level, making those personal connections. And well, just helping people feel like, you know, I really can't be part of the solution. My time and effort and energy invested in this is important and valuable.
We call that YCMAD. You can make a difference.
I'm just gonna build on what Robin was saying is how do you build trust in the conversations, relationships, so that people don't feel like, because this happens a lot in communities, like, oh, they're gonna do something at us or to us again. They're going to assess us, survey us. So how do you build that trust and relationship so that this is a true together process? So not a grant project.
So even with that, what you mentioned in your vignette was a history of mistrust. And how often does that happen in community? Okay, I'm going to move us on to the last stage, which is, we've already started talking about some of what I want to talk about in the last phase, which is barriers, obstacles. So I could write some of the things that we've already talked about. Talk about trust. We talked about in other places inertia, apathy,
Resources.
resources. Or even there are barriers that we can identify, but let's also talk about personal barriers to us engaging in this kind of work. Any fears, any hesitations, those things too. Let's look at that very, very personal level, but then also going more macro, okay? Everything in between too. How about the, I've done this before, I'm tired. So, not being very eloquent right now. Or now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or now, exhausted.
I think sometimes we experiment and we're disappointed when something doesn't work.
Okay.
I think there's times where, let's say this does not sound horrible, we don't really want to know the answer or the issue. We're afraid to hear what that issue is, so we just don't engage and go after it.
NIMBYs,
Okay. What was that last time?
NIMBYs, not my bad.
Oh, NIMBYism.
Anti
Yes.
anything.
NIMBY.
We have the perception that it'll slow us down to do this engagement.
You could write values up there as well.
Okay.
That could maybe go with NIMBY.
Okay, what was that? I'm sorry.
No, I think you could, in terms of transportation, you could add values next to NIMBY.
Okay. Yep. Values.
Change, people don't like change.
Change is intimidating. So here's a really interesting connection here. Perception that it will take more time, and also that I'm worn out and exhausted. Okay. So community work really does take putting in more at the front end to get the payoff on the back end. It's that capacity building, which requires that commitment up front. Yes, you're already tired, just do more to prepare people. But in the end, if you do that, it does start to alleviate that problem. It can start to alleviate some of this problem as well with resources, because you get more people to do more things. It starts to alleviate this. Anything else to add on barriers? And I'll kind of search through and see some of the other things that we said and added to the list here. These are big ones.
Well, one of the things that I'm sensing is actually sort of like a skills kind of capacity that's like, I mean, obviously, you know, there's a whole sort of training and curriculum in like how to do, you know, community engagement that I know, at least for myself, like I've never had that. Like, it was part of public health, you know, training, kinesiology training, like you did.
Lack of knowledge, skills, expertise.
I think the other thing is, even if we're not worn out and we're exhausted, we may just be so busy that there are so many demands on our time that it becomes one more thing to do. Even if it's energizing activity, even if what we're doing and the busyness that we have in our lives are fulfilling for us, it still is one more thing.
Competing commitments.
Fearful of something will not go as planned.
So then you put in all that work, and because it's adaptive, I mean, maybe there's some experimentation and a whole bunch of we don't know, we've not been in this territory before. We do all this, we go in energized, and it doesn't work.
I think sometimes in this work, we hold on to the work instead of giving it back, capacity building. There's a fear of loss sometimes in that. If you're really passionate about this, sometimes that's our own challenge.
Fear of loss. And that kind of goes back to that whole idea of familiarity. I know this, I've been doing it, and if I let it go, what if somebody else messes it up?
Well, and also because it's such a, sometimes so passion-based, like you choose to do this because you think it's really important, but may not be the priority of the department that you're in. So you think, uh-oh, if I don't do it, then no one's gonna pick up that slack.
So a difference in, what would I call that? Not commitment, difference in
Priorities.
What's that?
Priorities.
Priorities, yeah. Priorities and passion. Okay, so guys, I don't mean to end on barriers, it's negative, no, but it's something that we need to think about. So next steps, what we're gonna do here at Flint Hills Wellness Coalition is kind of bring all this information together, go through, categorize, and kind of use this as a next steps for planning to identify where we need to build capacity, issues that Flint Hills Wellness Coalition can help everyone here to address. And that'll be next stage. So those couple of stages of appreciative inquiry that I talked about we weren't doing today, that's the next thing to think about. Designing and destiny. How do we start to strategize around all of these things? And then how do we build up our capacity to be able to carry out that work? We're talking about Flint Hills Wellness Coalition helping build up that capacity to carry out that work. But then also you have roles to think about. Where do I see myself? The skills that I have, what do I want to be able to bring to the table? Because sometimes, in our everyday work, we don't really get to decide that. It's decided for us. But this is a place where you can decide on that because obviously we're all going to do better when we get to work in the area that we have the most passion and interested in. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking that is what Flint Hills Wellness Coalition is for people to express those passions and those skills and what they can bring to the table and contribute. Okay? So that's all I have.
Great.
Now we got wrap-ups.
Yeah, excellent. So, yeah.
I'll wait.
Yeah, so we will follow up by sending you, and sit back for a second because we'd like you to just fill out a little brief evaluation of this session. And while I'm handing these out, I'd like to direct your attention and give Brandon the floor here for a second and just say that, some of you may already be familiar with this language that's been thrown around, like adaptive work and technical work and, speaking to loss and these kinds of things. And one way to sort of think about this in our role in the work is that we're leaders. I mean, this is in fact a leadership meeting thing, right? But it's also a workshop meeting for the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition. And one sort of vision that we're playing around with the coalition is that the coalition is sort of a capacity building entity for the people doing the work. And so Brandon has an opportunity that he'd like to share with you along those lines.
Thanks, Brandon. So this idea originated from the Active Transportation Group and the Bike and Educate campaign. So I'm a very active community organizer in the Bike and Educate campaign, but I also, in my professional life, am a leadership educator and leadership coach. And one of the things that we are committed to trying to do is elevate the capacity of our community to advocate for positive change. And so talking with a few folks in this room, and Julie and Brandon in particular, we want to acknowledge that in order to make progress on the tough adaptive challenges that we're all confronting in our different civic and professional lives, it requires new ways of being and in many ways leadership capacity building. And so one of the things that we wanted to experiment with, and we're going to be hopefully doing this with the Bike MHK campaign, and I wanted to open it up to the larger coalition, is creating a leadership coaching program. So anticipating the results of the Kansas Leadership Center Transformation Grant and kind of this culture of adaptive leadership and leadership coaching in Manhattan, we're hoping to create a coaching program that can help our coalition increase the capacity to communicate across our organizations and our work, our scope of work, but also really create a space of accountability and action and idea generation through coaching practice. So if you're interested in participating in this pilot study, we're going to try to start it in the beginning of the year. So I'll leave my cards up at that desk. Just feel free to take one and shoot me an email and I'll follow up with you. Our hope is over the next couple of months, I will be meeting with people who are interested in participating in the coaching program. And then we would start the coaching in January. And depending on the circumstances, we could either do individualized coaching with just a leadership coach and yourself, or do some type of team coaching related to maybe a topic or organizational challenge. So let's say there are 3 or 4 people, usually no more than 4, who are wanting to work through a new idea or action, and they want to receive some coaching together. We could do the sessions that way. And just to what we're hoping to do is that we're really running an experiment. So we're seeing how this leadership coaching program and approach could work in our community. So we'll be doing some impact evaluation through the coaching program. That's why we're doing it. And if it's really successful, we're going to hopefully expand it to other individuals and organizations as folks come back from the Kansas Leadership Center participating in the transformation grant. So you would really be helping our community experiment with what this looks like, but also receive some leadership training in the process. So again, if you're interested, send me an email. If you have questions, send me an email. If you want to just know more about leadership coaching and how you can get involved to become a leadership coach in Manhattan, let me know. Again, my name is Brandon Cleaver, and I work at the Staley School of Leadership Studies. So I'll leave my cards up at the desk, and just feel free to grab one.
Just a couple things. This doesn't cost anything.
It's free of charge. Yeah, there's no. We're just doing it the way this started is I'm a volunteer community organizer for the Bike MHK campaign because I'm passionate about cycling as an alternative to transportation. And in our group, we're trying to increase our capacity to advocate for safe cycling in Manhattan. And I've been participating in these Flint Hills Wellness Coalition meetings. And I'm also a leadership educator in my professional life. So I thought that since we're doing this with the Bike MHK campaign and we're seeing how it works, if there's others involved with the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition that would like to also participate, we would welcome that. So it's really testing out the idea, and then maybe in the future we could apply for a community grant to kind of institutionalize the program to help our communities and organization move forward and make progress. So again, yeah, it's completely free, volunteer. Really, you would be receiving leadership capacity building and coaching, but then in turn, by participating, you're helping us make sense of the program and what it could look like for a larger group. That in some ways, when you think about the current scope, we're limiting it to the Bike MHK campaign and basically the Flint Hills Wellness Coalition, but with the hope that we would get some data and ideas of how this could look like at a community-wide scale to scale into our entire community.
Thanks, Brandon. This is a really good opportunity, especially if you haven't had training, at KFC, or even if you have had that training. And you mentioned that this is experimental. We're not the coaches are trained. We're not just experimenting with leadership. Yeah. You would be working with some very well-trained coaches.
Yeah. So. We're very fortunate at the Staley School. We actually have a partnership with the Kansas Leadership Center. So we have access to like trained leadership coaches. So you'd be receiving professional leadership coaching. And we get to do this as part of the Stately School because we're a land grant institution committed to public service. So, thanks.
Yeah, so we just got a couple of minutes left if you want to fill out those evals real quick, that'd be great.
You
Thanks,
just
Sharon.
sign it